So today I want to put together a buying guide for Corsair RGB controllers for 2023. Now in this video I'm not going to talk about keyboards, mice, headset stands, things like that. I primarily want to focus just on the ambient lighting controllers that Corsair currently sells. As you go looking at their website, and if you're new to RGB lighting, it can be kind of confusing as to all of the different controllers that Corsair makes. And it's not readily apparent, at least in my opinion, if you're just first looking at it, as to what all of the controllers do, what they mean. But I just want to put all of these controllers in one video, go through it real quick, so hopefully that'll just give you some direction as to what to purchase. As we go through this video and these controllers specifically, there's just a couple of connection types we need to talk about real quick. So Corsair fans are going to have two connectors. They're going to have the RGB connector, which is a Corsair 4-pin RGB connector. Now don't confuse that with the 12-volt 4-pin connectors that you'll find on your motherboard. This is a 5-volt ARGB connector that Corsair uses. There's like a data return pin on that. And because of that, you really need their controllers to connect those fans to without kind of hacking them up. And so that's the first connection you need to make. Now on a separate cable on a Corsair RGB fan is going to be the standard 4-pin PWM connector. And that's a standard connector that will connect to your motherboard and any other PWM connection that you can make. And so those are the two primary connections that we're going to be talking about today. The only other one that we're going to talk about in detail is the Corsair 3-pin ARGB connection. Now that uses the same signaling that the standard 3-pin ARGB does, like on your motherboard, but it's kind of been a little bit of a different form factor, so it's kind of specific to Corsair. So I'm not putting these controllers in any particular order, but I figured we'd start with kind of the most basic budget option, a controller that you're apt to get with a couple of the fan kits when you're just getting started. So let's go ahead and start with that one. That controller is going to be the Lighting Node Core. And again, you'll find this in some of the 3 fan kits that are currently shipping out there. And this controller just simply gives you RGB control of those fans. It's a 6-port controller. These are the 4-pin connections that we just spoke about, so they're specific to Corsair. You're not going to be able to take any other fan really out there that's not Corsair and plug it into this controller. Now this controller uses a SATA power connection for power and a 9-pin USB connection that needs to connect to a header on your motherboard. Now that's going to be how all of these controllers get their signal, and including keyboards, mice, headset stands, things like that. Anything that you use from Corsair is going to usually be a USB connection. That's how iCUE is going to communicate with it. And so anyways, real simple to connect up. Plug in your 6 RGB fans and iCUE will detect this and you can go ahead and start doing RGB lighting. And so the downside to this connector is it does not give you any connections for the 4-pin PWM connectors. And so because of that, you're going to need to locate a spot for those, whether that be on your motherboard using some of your system fan headers, things like that. That works just fine. You can use a PWM hub. That works just fine as well. The downside to that is you really won't get any control over the fan speed or the curves within iCUE. But for most basic budget builds, if you're not doing a crazy amount of fans and you don't mind a little bit of cabling on your motherboard, or you've got one of the cheap hubs lying around, because this, plus if you've already got this and then you purchase a cheap PWM hub, that's still cheaper than one of these other controllers, so that's a good solution. So that is where you would use this, is if you already have it, you're just getting started, you're budget oriented and you don't want to go spending the money on one of these controllers, the fancier ones. This works just fine and is a good way to get started. Now you can always upgrade later. Moving up maybe just a half a step is going to be the Lighting Node Pro. Now the Lighting Node Pro has been around for a little while, I think maybe 4 or 5 years. You can get this in a pack that is called the Lighting Node Pro. And what it is it comes with this controller and 4 RGB lighting strips. Because all this controller really gives you is 2 of these 3-pin RGB connections. Now the strips will plug in directly to here, and I'll put the descriptions to all of these products and everything I use in this video in the description below. You can buy an adapter cable which plugs into here and then adapts it to the standard, quote standard, 3-pin ARGB connector, and you can use non-Corsair RGB products and get it into iCUE. Now I've got a full video on that, which I'll put a link right here for that. and go check that out if you want to know more. But that's the primary focus of the Lighting Node Pro, is to use the RGB strips and a couple of other different types of RGB lighting. This does not control any fans or RGB for any fans at all, but this also uses a SATA power connection and a 9-pin USB header. So plug these two in, iCUE will detect it. You can configure each port depending on how many LEDs. Well, you can't specify how many LEDs, but you can specify what strip is out there and it'll know how many LEDs. Now, this does come currently, and I checked earlier today, late December 2022. The LL120 fan kits are still coming with this, but as I said, you can't connect any fans to this. So there's also a Corsair RGB hub. Now this is a 6-port fan RGB hub. So the ports on this hub are the 4-pin Corsair fan connections. Now, this just has a single SATA power connection to get power. And then how this connects is it comes with a cable, this 3-pin RGB connector, and it plugs into the Lighting Node Pro. Now, just to jump ahead a little bit, it will also connect to the Commander Pro and the Commander Core XT, but more on those in just a second. So you use that little patch cable and you connect these two together. Then you can go into iCUE, you can configure whatever port you connect it to, and you tell it, hey, I've got 6 fans, of whatever type, and it will just go ahead and signal out to these here. So the hub is a great solution. You can buy this standalone, you could buy a separate one, and you could connect a second one here if you want to do more than 6 fans, which I've got a video on that. But that's kind of a good little solution. Or you could do the fan hub and a couple of strips on top of that, or the fan hub and some non-Corsair RGB lighting if you get the adapter cable. So there's just a little bit more versatility in this solution here. Now, essentially, this Lighting Node Core is just this same thing, just kind of all put into the same box, minus the RGB connections. You don't get that on the Lighting Node Core. But because of that versatility, I'm going to put this just a half a step up from the Lighting Node Core. So check that out. Where would you use this controller? So it's going to be kind of the same as the Lighting Node Core. I would use this controller if I was, doing kind of a more basic budget build. And I've already got the controller. It came with a fan kit that I've purchased. And, so you've already got it. There's no additional expense to this. Or if I wanted the versatility of putting in non-Corsair RGB lighting, you could buy this either in a standalone for that purpose, or if you've already got it, you get at least one port if you're just using the one hub. So that's an area where I would consider this as well. Again, it'd be something more if I already had it and I'm not doing a ton of fans on here. Because the one con, same with as with the Lighting Node Core, you do have to find a location for the PWM speed power control for the fans. You don't get that with this solution. So therefore, you're going to get no iCUE control over your fans, at least the speed of them, the RPMs. You don't get to do any custom fan curves with this setup. So that might be a reason for you to consider the next controllers on the list. Now, the next one we'll talk about is the Commander Pro. And this controller also is a number of years old. I think it's been 4 years or so ago that I did the first review of this. But let's talk about this controller a little bit. This is going to be stepping up in price. And being as old as it is, I checked today, they still are selling this one if you're interested in it. But let's talk about what this controller gives you that these don't. So for the first time in our list today, this controller gives you 6 PWM fan speed connections, right? So you don't need another controller to do that. It also gives you 2 RGB connections, same as the Lighting Node Pro. I think it's probably just essentially a Lighting Node Pro in there. But you get the speed control, you get the RGB connection so you can put in non-Corsair RGB lighting. It also gives you 2 USB headers. So you kind of get your own little USB hub connection off to this. So that's kind of nice. And you do get 4 temperature probes. Now it does come with the temperature probes. These are just ambient air probes. You just stick them in your case wherever, plug them into here. Now iCUE will recognize that as a probe. And then when you're building out your fan curves, you can use this particular probe to build a particular fan curve. It's kind of cool. The one thing it does not have those 4-port fan RGB connections. So in order to do that, you still need the hub. And basically the hub is just the same as with the Lighting Node Pro. It's going to plug into the 3-pin RGB connection, and then you're going to configure that. So that's the one downside to this, in my opinion, is you still need this other device, but you do get a lot of other features here, including the temperature probes and the 2 USB ports. That's really one of the better things about this particular controller. So that is the Commander Pro. So where would I use this? I would use this really if I needed up to 4 temperature probes. Now, as you see coming up here in the list, the Commander Core XT also has temperature probes, just not as many. But that's where I would use is that if I really needed those more than I needed, fan control or anything like that. If I wanted the USB headers, of course you can buy a USB hub, but that's another 20, 30 bucks on top of that. So anyways, if I needed some of those components, the USB headers and the temperature probes, that'd be a good idea to consider this. Now, up till just the last year or so, this really was the only choice. The Core XT didn't exist, and the Commander Core, which we'll talk about also. And again, really the only downside to this one is you do need the hub in order to connect up a bunch of fans to it. Now, if you need more than 6 fans, you're going to have to connect more than one of these. And then you have the problem is you only get 6 PWM connectors, so then you'll have to find a place for the additional fans, which means you might need to add additional controllers here. Moving on up, let's go ahead and talk about the Commander Core XT. Now, I'll just cut right to the chase. The Commander Core XT is really my current favorite controller that Corsair makes. It's not perfect. It's got a couple little things about it I don't like, but it is a step up for most people, I think, from the Commander Pro. So it's really kind of identical in its form factor. It's about the same size. It also uses a single SATA power connection, and it uses a USB connection. iCUE will recognize it. But here's what it gives you. It gives you the same PWM connectors that the Commander Pro does. So you can control PWM fans on here. You can also control DC fans on both of these, 3-pin DC fans. You won't get any speed control on DC fans on the Core XT though. They'll just run at full speed, which, fair enough, at least it will run it. Okay, but what you do finally get is you get those 6 PWM ports, and you also get 6 fan connectors, RGB connectors. And so they've kind of put both of those on the same controller for the first time, which is really a step up. And one really cool thing about the RGB connectors on here is iCUE will automatically detect what type of fan you have on there. And so that's kind of a cool thing. You don't really need to go in there and tell it on each one. You can mix and match fans on all of these, whereas you can't do that like on the little hub here. You really need to use the same fan on all 6 ports. So the other thing this gives you is it gives you 2 temperature probes. So not 4, but it gives you 2. And I think for most people, 2 is going to be adequate. It gives you a single RGB port, not 2. So you could hook up a hub and get 6 additional ports with it as well, or use non-Corsair RGB lighting out of it, or you could use the RGB strips from Corsair. So that, in my opinion, is a pretty good all-in-one controller. It doesn't have the USB headers. What it has is this USB pigtail here. So you plug this into your motherboard or another 9-pin USB header, and it pigtails off of here and gives you this connection. This is what I don't like about this controller is on the pigtail here, only a single set of pins is connected. Now this will work fine if you plug most USB devices into this little pigtail. But like say, I can't plug in the Commander Pro to this because it requires both. If you're going to step up to any controller, this is probably going to be the one that I would recommend that you buy for most people, unless you need like all of the temperature probes and things like that, or if you need more RGB ports for some reason for non-Corsair RGB lighting, things like that. But for just 6 fans or under, and you'd maybe want to mess around with the temperature probes and maybe have a little bit of non-Corsair RGB, this is perfect. This is my favorite controller. And so this would be my most recommended out of the bunch. So the next controller that you may come in contact with in your shopping around for RGB lighting from Corsair is what is called the Commander Core. And there's no XT to this. This is just the Commander Core. Now it's very similar in function to the Core XT. It's a little bit smaller. And where you will find this is this comes with some certain AIO coolers that Corsair makes. And what it's got, in lieu of a couple of other things, is on the one edge it's got, I believe it's a 24-pin connector. And this is where your pump connects into, so you get your pump control and RGB lighting through this connector here. But it does retain the 6 PWM connections for all of your fans. It also has the 6-fan RGB hub. It works really identical to the Core XT in that respect. Now it does have one temperature probe port, but then that's it. There are no RGB lighting expansion ports on this. There's no USB extension to this, so that's it. You just get the, basically 6 fans can connect, one temperature probe, and your AIO. This also is powered by a single SATA connection and a single USB port. I would use this obviously if you're purchasing the AIO. This is going to be what you're going to use. Really, it's kind of a cool little controller. It does almost everything the Core XT does and does it really well. You can mix and match fans on this 6-port RGB hub. So the cons to this controller are if you need additional functionality. For example, if you need more than one temperature probe, you're going to have to look for some other solutions as well. Or if you need some additional USB headers, this does not have those. Or probably the biggest missing component is the RGB expansion ports, those 3-pin Corsair RGB ports, because those are really cool to get non-Corsair RGB in here. And so it does not have those. If that's functionality that you're looking for, you're still going to want to use this for your AIO, but then you'll need to choose one of these other devices to get whatever function you want. Now, I think I've mentioned it earlier, but you can use more than one controller. You can use several controllers. It's no big deal. You just get them all plugged in, get them all into USB. iCUE will recognize all of them, and then you can configure them all, and you're off to the races. You get all the functionality. It's just how much space do you have in your case, to get all of these in there. So anyways, the Commander Core probably is not one that you'll buy on just a standalone. You're really going to get it with the AIO controller specifically. But I think the best pairing, if you really need all the functionality, I would argue, I guess, if you needed just the RGB expansion ports, get a Lighting Node Pro and these two together. That's a great combination. If you're going to do more than 6 fans and you want some of that additional functionality, the Core XT and the Commander Core together is really a great solution. It takes up a little bit of space in your case, but it gives you a lot of functionality and looks really cool, and you can really build out a system with that. From there, a couple of other controllers that you might see that I want to talk about just real briefly is, let's talk about the LS100 kit. Now the LS I did a review of this. In fact, I'll put a link here in the video so you can go check that out if you want. That's the external lighting strips. You put them behind your monitor, and then in iCUE you can tell it to do video synchronization. So if you're playing a video game, it kind of lights up behind the monitor based on what's going on the screen. It's a pretty cool little product. The controller that comes with that is the little LS100. It comes with the starter kit. I don't believe you can buy it separately, but somebody correct me if I'm wrong there. But it's kind of similar in nature to the Lighting Node Pro. But it's an external controller is the difference. So the USB connection that it makes, it's a USB-A connection, not the internal USB 9-pin header connection. So it's meant to be used external to your case, and it's got an external power adapter as well. And so from that standpoint, you can really kind of get it out. I've got it running these RGB lights. In fact, that's what those strips are the LS100 strips. Just kind of, using a couple of additional ones that I've got. And I've got this LS100 controller up here for this reason, to get it out of here. And that's kind of a cool controller, because I can also plug in non-Corsair RGB lighting to that if I wanted to, because I configure it exactly the same way as I do the Lighting Node Pro. Just set up whichever port, and you can tell it whatever devices you want on that. So that's kind of a cool controller, and maybe a reason to consider that LS100 kit. And they do make a bunch of expansion strips, the diffused expansion strips. So that's kind of a cool controller to go check out if you're looking to do stuff behind your desk, or if you want that video synchronization. Another controller that you might find is on a couple of the AIOs. The controller is built into it. So the pump housing assembly is kind of the controller. So you'll have a USB cable coming off of that, a power cable, and then off of that you'll get a couple of fan headers. Now iCUE will recognize that, and you can control the RGB through there. The PWM connections you can control through there. Why I bring that up is it's not really a controller that you'll actually go out and buy, but that's a consideration on an AIO. Now I do prefer the AIOs that come with the Commander Core, but if the AIO that you're buying has the controller built into it. The advantage you get with that is you already get the connection. So say if you're going to do more than 6 fans and you're using one of those AIOs, you could just pair up your additional fans, say with a Commander Core XT. So that's also another good pairing if you're going to do more than 6 case fans. Now, a couple of the fan kits, some of the, I think the lower end ones will come with kind of a little standalone controller. I don't actually have one of those fan kits here, but that connects into just kind of a little self-contained controller. I don't think iCUE even controls those, but you kind of plug all those fans in, and then it's got a couple little buttons on it that you can manipulate it. And I think maybe you can hook it up to your case, use the reset switch or something like that. That's not really a controller that we really need to talk about much, because for what we're talking about today, that's not a controller that you're really going to use. But be aware, I think it's a couple of the really low, the very budgety, SP fan kits probably still come with that, but it's a good way to get started. There's nothing wrong with it. It's just you're not going to get a bunch of fancy iCUE control over those things. The final set of controllers that we'll talk about is going to be some of the controllers that come with the cases. Now, I don't have an exhaustive list of the controllers that come with some of their higher end cases. A lot of them are going to come with the Commander Core XT I've seen. I think maybe there's 1 or 2 out there that come with a Commander Pro. Those might be a little bit older. So this particular case, this is a 5000X. It does come with 2 controllers in it. Well, they're not really both controllers, but it essentially is coming with a lighting node core. In fact, I think that's how iCUE detects it. What's different about it, though, is it has no plastic on it. It's just a raw circuit board, but it's essentially just a 6-port fan RGB hub, but it's got the same connectors, USB, SATA, plug it in and you're off to the races. What this case does come with, though, is a 6-port PWM hub. And iCUE doesn't control that, but you just basically plug that into like a motherboard header, so that you can get a PWM signal to it, and it just feeds that out to all 6 fans. So all 6 fans will run at the speed that the one does. But there might be a couple of other little controllers out there that I'm not aware of in some of the other cases. But I think primarily you're going to get something similar to that, or you're going to get a Core XT with it, maybe a Commander Pro in some of those cases. But just check the specs of your case and you'll be able to find out what controller it comes with. And it's probably going to be a flavor of these, if not one of these that we've talked about today. If you're looking for some connection guides on how to connect up all these controllers, I've got quite a few videos on this channel that are intended to help you do exactly that. I'll link to those in the description below, so check it out down there, or go to the channel page and look for those videos, and I think you'll find something there that will get you pointed in the right direction and give you the very basics on how these all go together. All right, well, there you have it. There's kind of the RGB controller lineup from Corsair as it ends in 2022. Not aware of any new controllers coming out. If anybody's got any information on any new stuff coming out, please let me know. If I've missed a controller or something that's out there that I'm not aware of, again, bring it to my attention. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, whatever, put it in the comments below. Try to get to those as best I can and when I can. I'm always happy to help out to the best of my ability. That is going to do it for today. Thanks for watching.